One of the most unusual films of the great director Christopher Nolan is Dunkirk. This is his first historical work, which was highly appreciated by both viewers and historians. However, how authentic was the movie 100%, and which characters from the movie actually existed in reality? We will tell you about the real events in Dunkirk and compare them with the movie. In May 1940, Europe was already in the fire of World War II for 9 months. In April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, occupying those countries in just a few days. France resisted much longer, but soon German troops broke through the Maginot Line, which became the prerequisite for the events at Dunkirk. The British Expeditionary Force under the command of Lord John Galt, French units, and some Belgian troops were blocked in the area of the city of Dunkirk. Lord Gord was the first to propose an urgent evacuation, and on May 20, 1940, the troops of the German Army Group A, under the command of Colonel General Georg von Rundstedt, launched an offensive from the south and southwest, and the troops of the German Army Group B, under the command of Colonel General Lebo, from the east and southeast. At this time, there were approximately 450,000 soldiers on the coast of Dunkirk. On the evening of May 2026, the British Expeditionary Force was ordered to begin evacuation. The UK government has appealed to all owners of private ships, boats, and other vessels to take part in the evacuation of troops. Most of the smaller craft could come close to shore, but the medium-sized craft took advantage of the calm seas these days and headed for the English coast. Small boats, and yachts transported people to large military and merchant ships, which themselves could not come ashore. In total, more than 800 to 810 military and civilian ships of various types took part in the evacuation, of which more than a quarter were sunk, and about the same number were damaged. In some cases, boarding ships was carried out using improvised moorings made up of cargo and coves driven into the water at low tide. The evacuation had to be carried out under constant German air raids and artillery fire, which greatly tired the troops waiting for landing. Since June 2, it was necessary to abandon the evacuation during the daytime. Fighters of the British Air Force, based on airfields in southern England, did everything possible to prevent German aircraft. From May 2027 to June 4, British fighter aircraft made over 2,500 sorties, destroying 130 German aircraft, but losing 302 of their own. By midnight on June 2, the last units of the British Expeditionary Force were loaded onto the transport, and 95,000 people, including personnel of the British troops, were evacuated from the composition of the Allied forces, mainly French. On the night of June 3, despite increased difficulties, the British attempted to evacuate the remaining French troops, and in this way another 26,000 people were saved. Unfortunately, several thousand French soldiers who were acting in the rear guard had to be left behind. Losses as a result of the destruction of ships during the passage by sea amounted to about 2,000 people. By the morning of June 4, the operation was completed, and a total of 338,000 people from the British and Allied forces were transferred to England. All equipment was left on the coast. Now let's figure out what was true in Christopher Nolan's film, and what the director decided to embellish. Let's start with the character of Kenneth Branagh, Captain Bolton. Did Bolton really exist? The character was based on another historical figure, Sir William George Tennant, who became famous during the Dunkirk rescue operation. On May 26, 1940, Captain Tennant was appointed senior naval officer ashore at Dunkirk and posted to Dover. There he took command of a group of 8 officers and 160 sailors. The group was on the MSV Hound destroyer to assist in the evacuation of British and French troops who ended up in France after it was captured by German troops. Tennant's task was to organize the people and help them get to the ships waiting for them to be transported to the UK. Tennant was in close proximity to Dunkirk until the last ship sailed on June 2, 1940. That day, he personally patrolled the Dunkirk beach with a loudspeaker, looking for British soldiers. Tennant's efforts in the evacuation of Dunkirk were greatly appreciated, and on June 7 he was awarded the title of Companion of the Order of the Bath. Among the rank and file, he received the nickname Dunkirk Joe. Also, for the evacuation of Dunkirk, Tennant was awarded French awards, a military cross, and the Order of the Legion of Honor. Unlike what is shown in the Nolan film, where it seems that Captain Bolton remained on the coast of Dunkirk and never returned to his homeland, in reality everything was a little different. William Tennant also left Dunkirk on one of the last ships and continued his service until the end of World War II. In June 1944, Rear Admiral Tennant was placed in charge of the Royal Navy for the transport, assembly, and installation of the Mulberry Harbours, the British system of temporary shore installations used on the rough coast of Normandy to offload military materiel, personnel, and supplies during Operation Overlord. For his contribution to the success of several military operations, Tennant was elevated to the rank of Commander of the Order of the British Empire and awarded the Legion of the Count in the United States. Tennant died in 1963 with the rank of Lord Lieutenant. All in all, it seems that being a feature film, Dunkirk had to be oversaturated with fictional moments to create an overall dramatic atmosphere. Take, for example, the fragment where the unknown soldier drops his equipment and goes into the water. You may think this moment is fiction, but in fact, Nolan carefully approached the adaptation of even such minute details. According to witnesses of those events, there really was a certain nameless soldier who threw away his weapon and told other soldiers that he was going to sail to England, after which he threw himself into the water. Currently, there are many world-class athletes swimming the English Channel in pursuit of their interests. However, such an extreme swim requires considerable experience of swimming in cold water lasting 6 hours and continuous observation by observers. Naturally, the wives and frozen soldiers of the Second World War simply physically could not overcome such a distance by swimming. Therefore, the moment shown by Nolan is a window into the past, in which one can see people mentally crushed by the war, ready for outright suicide, just to avoid a longer wait for help on the dangerous coast of Dunkirk. The film also contains a storyline dedicated to the pilot performed by Tom Hardy. His main problem is not the German planes that are chasing him, but the lack of fuel. Why is the pilot so concerned about this problem? The fact is that in the early stages of World War II, pilots had to carefully save fuel when crossing the strait, and even then they had less than an hour to hold out over Dunkirk and return back. It often happened that fighters ran into German aircraft attacking the Royal Navy, and they had to fight over the sea. Unfortunately, the soldiers on the shore, who did not know the intricacies of aviation, were not delighted that Allied aircraft so rarely and briefly appeared in the sky to provide protection from the air evacuation. The RAF fought German fighters and bombers over the beaches of Caledon, Kirk and Ostend, but almost all the reports of surviving soldiers say that they never saw the RAF in the sky above them. In this way, Nolan very carefully recreated even the smallest details, including the moment when a soldier drops his equipment and swims into the water, and the problems that pilots faced during the war. The film Dunkirk provides a window into the past, which allows you to see the hardships and desperation of the military events of those times. This is reflected in one of the last scenes of the film, where one of the evacuated soldiers rushes to the rescued pilot and says, "Where is the hospitality that awaited us in the homeland of the pilots?" In fact, the pilot, who was escaping over the Dunkirk beach, had to struggle to get on the boat, and when he returned to England the next day, he was sent back into the air. The film Dunkirk also demonstrates the attitude of the British towards the French. The British were negatively disposed towards the French due to the fact that they, in their opinion, surrendered France and threatened England. Therefore, the scene where they try to push Poe Gibson out of the boat has a basis. In reality, this was the policy of high-ranking officers. England seriously hoped that France could hold off a German attack, and Churchill was strongly in favor of getting the French off the beaches to encourage France to keep fighting. Some French officers made the heroic decision not to retreat and to cover the escape of their allies. The film Dunkirk bravely shows not only the evacuation and flight of soldiers from the front line, but also the unwillingness of the British Army to openly enter into conflict with the Germans. Indeed, they were reluctant to help the French directly for fear of an invasion after the defeat of France. England's main line of defense was the Royal Navy, and the British Army, along with the Royal Air Force, was ready to sink the enemy flotilla and protect the flow of supplies across the North Atlantic. Therefore, senior officers at Westminster ordered the best destroyers to be withdrawn from Dunkirk. Likewise, many RAF squadrons based in England were prohibited from fighting as they needed to be kept in defense of the homeland. Nevertheless, the losses in the Royal Air Force were very large. 145 aircraft were shot down in 9 days of hostilities after the fall of France. After the defeat of France and the threat of invasion from Germany, the situation for Great Britain became very gloomy. On July 16, 1940, Hitler approved a plan for a landing operation called Sea Lion, in which the Nazis planned to defeat the main British forces and surround London. However, having weighed all the risks, Hitler decided to deploy the victorious army towards the USSR. The film Dunkirk boldly keeps pace with historical events, showing the dark pages of history. He talks about the battle for the survival of the evacuated soldiers, about the difficult political relations and the unwillingness of the army to enter into direct conflict with a superior enemy. The director of the film deserves credit for boldly approaching the chronicle of the events of that time and showing them with a high degree of realism and authenticity.